Welcome to The Place Inside. This is your host, Laurence Galian. In the last few days, I read an old SF book by the great Michael Crichton of Jurassic Park fame, entitled Sphere. My good friend Omar lent it to me. You may have seen the movie. We all know that movies have usually little to do with the book that they're based on. Now, someone recently said that people living in these times have fat minds. And what did he mean by that they have fat minds? Well, he was saying that just like overweight people just keep stuffing themselves with food, the people alive today stuff themselves with information. Usually it's information off of the internet. The result? We have 17-year-olds who have read about a subject on the internet and now think that they are experts in the subject. All the great secrets, mysteries, passwords, and so forth, they're all there for the taking on the internet. And on more than one occasion, I've had an uppity youngster coming up to me telling me that he or she knows all about this or that subject that I have spent decades studying, and it's actual experience, years of experience, but they count for nothing anymore in these people's minds. What they want, what they crave are facts. They don't know what it means to suffer, work, and strive for a goal, because it is there in a millisecond after a Google search. They don't need to suffer and work and strive for knowledge. They don't need to gain knowledge. It's just given to them on a silver platter. And so what do you think is the result? The result is that they do not value the knowledge that they receive. They do not put the proper emphasis. It doesn't mean anything to them. Well, Crichton says things in Sphere that are as relevant today as they were almost 15 years ago when he wrote the book, and it's truly amazing. We need to talk about these things that he wrote about. As I was reading the book, and I really recommend it to you, it's one of those books you cannot put down. I was struck by one staggering thought. Maybe we shouldn't be seeking to meet extraterrestrials. I couldn't believe I was thinking this. Me, the me who has always wanted for Earth to be part of a conscious participation in a galactic federation? Well, hear me out. Let me tell you what I found, and then let's reason and see what conclusions we can come to together. First, when we talk about contact with extraterrestrials, the first subject that always comes up is that governments and politicians say that we will all panic if confronted by the fact that extraterrestrials are here on the planet or are about to land on the planet. And I always thought that this was bullshit. But if we're honest about this, how do you really feel when you think about, let's say, abduction? Maybe it's because I'm a bit older than some of my listening audience, but I can remember shitting in my pants thinking that in the middle of the night, an extra-dimensional doorway can open up in my wall. I am levitated off my bed, completely paralyzed, and brought into an alien ship where all sorts of extremely painful probes and experiments will be done on me, especially the anal ones. Whitley Strieber says that he still suffers great physical pain in that part of his body from what he endured decades ago. Well, Now, when the subject of panic and anxiety comes up, also comes up the subject of Orson Welles' famous radio broadcast. You know, the one in which he pretended that we were under attack by the Martians? It's always pointed out that only one person perhaps died that night, maybe from a heart attack, listening to that show. Well, what's generally overlooked is that maybe one person may have died from a heart attack, but the general population were terrified. Does the word anxiety come to mind? Anxiety is the #1 problem in America. Valium is the #1 prescription sold. Do you think America has a problem with anxiety? Based just on that information alone, do you think we could handle seeing aliens and knowing they might be appearing in our bedrooms or living rooms at any moment? Yes, maybe you and I can. But if Valium is the #1 prescription sold in America, well, I don't know about my next door neighbor, and I'm being very serious here. I know also several people who do live in constant anxiety, and this is one of the reasons why I created the Metaphysical Freedom Fighters and this podcast, The Place Inside, because these people have experienced being asleep in their bedrooms when suddenly awoken by a group of short aliens walking into their rooms. I know the people who are terrified. I know them personally, the people who have lived through some meetings and abductions. Not all are terrified, I grant you that. For some, the experience was great, and in the past we know that some met very sexy men and women. Most look upon the experience years later, and they do say that it was worth it. However, while the experience was happening, they were terrified. And I don't know who these experts are who say that these abductees feel that the experience was worth it, but definitely for many years, I know from personal experience, they do not feel it was worth it. The fears unleashed by contact with a new life form are not understood. Who is studying this right now? The most general reaction is absolute terror. These are not the anthropomorphic aliens from Star Trek with 2 eyes, a nose, mouth, 2 arms, 2 legs, and just maybe a few brow ridges or funny-looking ears and earrings. Let me tell you, in the 50s and 60s, some tests actually were done. It was found, believe it or not, that physical fitness was one of the best indicators that a person would not freak out when confronted by an alien. That is why I have been steadily recommending to you all sorts of methods of physical fitness. For example, we talked about Mopai, Qigong, Aikido, and the infinite ways to develop your flow of ki, the infinite energy that permeates and animates the universe. There is a large chance that if we do meet an alien, that the experience will be inexplicable. We have all these Hollywood movies in which all sorts of decoders, vocal decoders, are invented or are already in existence so that we can carry on conversations with aliens. Or else in these movies, these aliens have watched Earth television and they have learned English. Isn't that so convenient? Well, maybe we will never be able to converse with the visitor. The problem is that most Hollywood movies and SF books, sci-fi books, talk about aliens as acting in human ways, even if they don't look human. Bear with me a moment here. I am not saying that in these movies and books they aren't mean and terrible sometimes, but certainly we have many mean and terrible tyrants right here on planet Earth. This is nothing new. Even if the extraterrestrial doesn't look human, if it is a reptile or a big insect or an intelligent crystal or looks like a man of war that lives in the ocean, it still acts in a human way. There is always the assumption of some kind kind of human values or human understanding, human ways of approaching a humanly understandable universe. I mean, just think about the viewer in Star Trek as they look at and talk to the captains of other ships. What if the other captains didn't have eyes? Why do we always assume they have eyes? Is it because of what I just said? The assumption of humanity? And like I said, generally 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, even sexy breasts sometimes. Now, what we are doing is called a thought experiment here. So bear with me. If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. If you can't deal with listening to what I'm saying, then you need to go deeper inside yourself and ask yourself some tough questions. First, just within human behavior, we can't really figure each other out. I mean, with all the truly great scientists of the psyche, Freud, Jung, Wilhelm Reich, with all these great men and women, we still can't hold our marriages together. The divorce rate is soaring, and we're constantly fighting with each other, from just bickering to actual murder and mass murder, serial murder, and warfare. We don't have the slightest idea of how humans behave, and yet we want to interact with aliens? Then think about just the difference between an American person and a Japanese person. Such differences in culture, and when you come to a new life form, maybe literally incomprehensible. The values and ethics of this new life form may be utterly different. For example, we have what we call the 10 Commandments, and one of those commandments is, thou shalt not kill. Well, we might encounter an alien visitor that may not be able to be killed, and so it may not have any concept of killing in the first place. The creature may not be able to be killed. As someone once said, you can't break the arms of a creature that has no arms. Or the visitor may be immortal. Now, if you're one of those listeners to my podcast that write me those nasty letters, you may be thinking that I'm making fun of Jesus right now. I assure you, I am not. Certain creatures on our own planet Earth are immortal. For example, single-cell organisms like bacteria and yeasts are apparently capable of living indefinitely, and a virus could be considered immortal. But okay, let's talk about something that may be a little closer to home, even though we know that viruses are perfectly capable of killing millions of humans. Remember the plagues. But okay, let's talk about dimensions for a moment. So far, we've only considered 3-dimensional creatures. Generally, every movie, TV show, and most books talk about 3-dimensional aliens. We perceive a universe that is 3-dimensional, yet we know that many scientists think that our universe has 9 or 11 dimensions, and different numbers have been proposed. Therefore, our extraterrestrial visitor may be multi-dimensional, not just coming from another dimension. Okay, I want to make this clear. Many ufologists have been speaking lately about that the extraterrestrial visitor may be coming from another dimension, but what I am talking about is that the extraterrestrial visitor itself may be multi-dimensional, so that it literally does not exist in our usual 3 dimensions. To take the simplest case, if it were a 4-dimensional creature, we could only see part of it at any time, because most of the creature would exist in the 4th dimension. Those of you who have seen the movie What the Bleep Do We Know, and also the section of that movie that has actually been made into a separate movie by the director called What the Bleep Do We Know? Down the Rabbit Hole, you understand what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, check it out. It's on YouTube, it's on Amazon. Again, check out Down the Rabbit Hole part. The problems faced by masters in the past in order to explain to us about the the higher realms of existence can be understood very well from this wonderful example in this movie, What the Bleep Do We Know?, where a cartoon character named Dr. Quantum, who is in the three-dimensional world, he tries to explain to a little entity who lives in the two-dimensional world that there are more worlds with higher dimensions that it's living in. It's really amazing and well done. Now, just imagine if this alien visitor that comes to planet Earth is a warmongering visitor. We've certainly experienced the Huns. We've experienced Genghis Khan. These people were not exactly respectors of human life. And this is another misconception. There have existed on Earth beings and armies like Genghis Khan and his army that were very sophisticated, yet at the same time very deadly. There is this strange theme that's going around in UFO circles that are saying that, oh, an advanced civilization could not possibly be against living things, and that they would be very peaceful. Well, just look at Adolf Hitler and how they were building rockets. The Nazis, they were building the Nazi Bell, exploring interplanetary travel, maybe time travel itself. They were close to having an atomic bomb. In fact, they probably had it, and it was just canceled at the last minute. And yet, what did they do? They killed millions of Jews, Gypsies, Roman Catholics, Polish people, and so on. Why are there UFO fans who are adamant about their opinion that an advanced civilization cannot exist on another planet that is warlike? They are just plain wrong about this. These civilizations are not in the majority, but they exist. Now, if most of our hypothetical creature existed in the fourth dimension, it probably would be very difficult to kill. And that's just a four-dimensional creature. What if it were five-dimensional? We've talked about alien visitors with bad attitudes. However, we haven't even touched on benevolent aliens who are just as deadly to us. How could that be? I will tell you. Irrespective of whether it's a multi-dimensional alien or a virus or whatever, irrespective of whether it shares our morals or has no morals at all, the worst case is that it hits us below the belt. What do I mean by that? I mean that it behaves in a way that it interferes with our basic life mechanisms. A good example is the AIDS virus, the HIV. The reason why AIDS is so dangerous is not that it's new. We get new viruses every year, every week, and all viruses work in the same way. They attack cells, and in fact the machinery of the cells to make more viruses. What makes the AIDS virus dangerous is it attacks the specific cell that we use to defend against viruses. AIDS interferes with our basic defense mechanism, and we have no defense against it. So what kind of EB could interfere with our basic life mechanisms? It could breathe in air and exhale cyanide gas. It could excrete radioactive waste. It could disrupt our brain waves, interfere with our ability to think. It might merely interrupt our cardiac conduction. In other words, stop our hearts from beating because of some kind of electrical system that it operates on. It might produce a sound vibration that would resonate in our skeletal system and shatter our bones. The alien visitor may actually do nothing directly harmful to us at all. Now this gets interesting. It might simply exhale a toxin that kills chloroplasts. In other words, so that plants could no longer convert sunlight. Then all the plants on Earth would die, and consequently all life on Earth would die. It also has to do with evolution, or at least Christ who made us. We've obviously evolved from monkey-like creatures, or in my opinion and many other people's opinions, we are the result of genetic experiments on monkey-like creatures, or genetic experiments on human women, Cro-Magnon women. It seems like that at least in Europe, there were 7 women, 7 mothers who are responsible for all life in Europe, and one, get this, just one alien male figure that impregnated them. Now, but what if our visitors are blind and communicate, let's say, through subtle odors? Now, you can imagine they evolved from a very different universe or place in the universe, and their science describes a very different universe. Our science is very visual. Theirs may be very scent-oriented, or they might totally ignore the world altogether and concentrate on a highly developed science of mind. Now, this is exactly the opposite of Earth technology. We're all obsessed with matter, with our science, but their alien technology might be a purely mental technology with no visible hardware at all. So the problem is that unless the alien visitors are remarkably similar to us, no really interesting information can be exchanged, and they could be devastatingly dangerous to us, whether or not they want to be or we want them to be. However, we are not helpless, and that might be the subtitle for this podcast. For instance, in the 1960s, there was a series of experiments about visual perception which demonstrated that subjects interpreted blurred pictures according to their predisposition. In other words, hungry people saw these pictures as food. Now, these pictures really, there's no way to interpret them as anything, but if the person viewing them was very, very hungry, if they were deprived of food for a day, they would see these pictures as pictures of food. It is interesting that what we see, we interpret as the solution to our problem. If we are hungry, we see something that is definitely unclear, but we see it as food. If we are thirsty, we interpret it as water. If we need a god, we interpret it as a deity. For example, during one of the most famous appearances of the Virgin Mary, the apparition itself never actually identified itself as the Virgin Mary. Yet, when the Catholic Church learned about the apparition, it told the young woman involved that she had a visitation from the Blessed Mother Mary. In other words, they interpreted it for her. The famous ufologist Jacques Vallée, in his new and fantastic book entitled, quote, Wonders of the Sky, unquote, has this to say, which I think is very pertinent to tonight's discussion. Quote, every epoch has interpreted the phenomena in its own terms, often in a specific religious or political context. People have projected their worldview, fears, fantasies, and hopes into what they saw in the sky. They still do so today, unquote. When faced with the truly amazing, we human beings generally attempt to make some sense of what we are experiencing. We are always trying our best to identify everything in our environment. So what someone saw in 1600 saw as an elf, someone in 1975 saw as a gray. The costume changed, not the being inside the costume. It's just that we had no prior experience with the being inside the costume, so we created a costume for it. There is an apocryphal story that says that when Christopher Columbus's ships arrived on the shores of the Caribbean isle, the indigenous people who lived on the islands, they had never seen one of these huge ocean sailing vessels before, so they thought that a forest was approaching them on the water. They interpreted the masts of the ship ship, and so forth, as tree trunks and tree limbs. However, as we know from movies like The Secret, and really, the secrets given away in The Secret are nothing new. In fact, they are a continuation of something called the, quote, New Thought Movement, unquote, which goes back to the turn of the century, the last century, around 1900. We have had some really great minds that have brought us much wisdom in this area. For example, I urge you to subscribe to a magazine entitled Science of Mind magazine, and also to get a book by Ernest Holmes. His name is spelled Holm, M as in Martin, E, S as in Sam. Ernest Holmes. His book, Science of Mind. Then there's also a man with the name of Wallace D. Wattles. That's Wallace, W-A-L-L-A-C-E, middle initial D as in David, Wattles. I'll spell that for you. W-A, T as in Thomas, T as in Thomas, L as in Laurence, E as in Edith, S as in Sam. Look him up on Amazon.com. I'm sure you can get his books for a good price. He is amazing. Wallace D. Wattles really gets into the science, if you will, of how this works. But the way he writes, he expands your mind so that you begin to really perceive the science. You see, the difference between the man of the past and the weak man of the present is that the man of the past knew directly. He had direct knowledge. The weak man of the present only believes. He has second-hand knowledge. He believes what someone else directly experienced firsthand. So you can see the difference that I'm talking about. And then, of course, the man I mentioned already to you many podcasts ago, Farrell, his book, The Art and Practice of Creative Visualization. You can get it on Amazon.com. Farrell is just the best, period. As the metaphysical freedom fighter, you need to have many tools in your toolbox. Not only must you be able to manipulate the key, the primal energy that moves through the interstices of the universe, but you must be able to manipulate reality itself, which is what we're talking about here. Reality is plastic. It molds itself to your thought, married to strong emotional feelings. That concludes our transmission for tonight. We are now signing off. We will be in contact soon.